The year was 1960. Although nearly 100 years had passed since Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had freed them from the chains of slavery, African Americans in southern states still faced oppressive legislation, segregation, and even race-inspired violence in the United States. The protests of the civil rights movement were well underway, but Caucasian lawmakers stubbornly continued in their refusal to create legislation which would make all men equal. Into that tempest, a woman named Harper Lee sent her novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. Through the book's central themes such as race, the significance of moral education, and the humanity of all people, To Kill a Mockingbird illustrates the darkest parts of humanity while simultaneously highlighting all that is good and noble. Atticus Finch says in the novel, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it." It would appear that this message of empathy had an impact. The book soon became a bestseller and is now considered influential on both the civil rights movement and American society as a whole. In our speech, we will first address the national context for the book, the civil rights movement, and then explore the book itself, understanding its ideas in light of current events, and then conclude by discussing how the nation responded to this gently delivered rebuke to society.
Prior to the civil rights movement, African Americans feared for their safety and well-being on a daily basis. In addition to not being allowed to vote, they were segregated from society both inside and outside of a school setting and were lynched and beaten with no motivation other than the color of their skin. During this time, people decided to come together to stand up for what they believed in, but in a peaceful and civil way. Civil rights activists wanted change, and within these fearless and forceful people, knowledgeable and exceptional leaders began to sprout from within. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and Charles Hamilton Houston all put their lives in the forefront to radiate and reiterate their beliefs in freedom and equality. It was the 1960s in places like Montgomery, Alabama, where these brave people wanted to make a bold statement that all men, regardless of color, are equal. Martin Luther King Jr. formed Walks for Justice, relayed his I Have a Dream speech, and was still relentless in his work by sending letters while he was imprisoned. Rosa Parks made it her duty to sit in front of that bus, regardless of her color, to physically tell everyone that it shouldn't matter who you are and where you should sit. She knew and believed that the color of her skin should not assign her to a different place in society. Malcolm X was known as Malcolm Little, but changed his last name to X to openly express and veto his slave name. He wanted every black woman and man to show pride and extenuate the beauty of his or her people. Charles Hamilton Houston went to great lengths as a lawyer to dismantle the Jim Crow laws and inform others to carry on and expand on what he had started. He was persistent to end segregation as people knew it. Although their hard work eventually paid off in a major way in the form of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was the violent and tumultuous journey that led to his legislation that inspired Lee's story.
1926. In the county courthouse of Monroe, Alabama, a young lawyer pled for the lives of two African American men wrongly accused of murdering a white store clerk. His defense was skillful, his evidence compelling, but the case had already been decided. The men were found guilty and hung by the neck until dead, on inconclusive evidence and on the skewed principles of a blind society. This stark denial of justice created no more disturbance in the consciousness of the American South than the putting down of a mad dog. It was just another act of necessity. It was custom. It was natural. But for the young lawyer's daughter, it was another evidence of her country's sickness, a blight that steadily crept across the nation, despoiling her strength and beauty. This episode was just one of the many that inspired Harper Lee, for she was that lawyer's daughter, to pen the book To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm sure the story of To Kill a Mockingbird is familiar to most of you. Scout, the daughter of a small-town lawyer, tells the story of her 9th year of life, the year she grew up. She and her brother Jim adventure through their small-town home, Macomb, Alabama. But the carefree play of childhood is interrupted as Scout's idealistic view of Macomb's citizens is shattered and her own ideas are challenged. The primary catalyst for Scout's growth is the story from Harper Lee's life. Scout's father, Atticus, is assigned to defend an innocent black man accused of rape. When Atticus actually seeks justice for the man, he comes under the condemnation of the town. Scout struggles with this. Atticus Finch is respected as Macomb's most learned, upright citizen. He is their best lawyer, their state representative, and a true friend to all. but society's collective memory experiences sudden amnesia when the Honorable Mr. Finch takes a stand against their prejudices. Scout learns through this trial the ugliness of a town where men are judged and held in contempt based on their skin color. Though the accused, John Robinson, is supposedly equal to his accuser under the law, most of the town views him as a half-man. He doesn't deserve justice, because justice is inconvenient to their lifestyle and contrary to their deep-seated prejudice. But in the rest of Mockingbird, Scout traces this ugly hatred into the hearts and homes of most of Maycomb, and most of all, into her own heart. Scout is constantly at odds with her Aunt Alexandria, who has come to be the angel of civilization to her tomboy niece. Aunt Alexandria is the very essence of Southern spinster aunt, and her womanly ways are the terror and toil of Scout's life. But Scout discovers in her harsh, unyielding aunt a faithful, loving heart, and one that abhors the petulant gossip and slander that harms so many in Maycomb. Scout and her brother Jim live in terrified abhorrence of their old crabby neighbor. She seems just a sour old puss who hates youth and happiness. But she reveals herself eventually as a brave old woman battling heroin addiction. She dies fighting to retake her life from that devilish enslavement. At one point in the story, Jim rues the decrepit state of his father. Atticus is not all that a boy's father should be. Why can't he play in the fathers and sons football game like every other dad in town? He is lacking in manly strength. But Jim soon discovers that the nature of his father's strength is inward. It is the moral firmness of character, an uncompromising principle in the face of injustice and condemnation. As Scout puts it, it was in times like these, dear in the rape trial, when I thought my father, who hated guns and had never been to any wars, was the bravest man who had ever lived. Dear in the summer, Scout and Jim's primary amusement is either reenacting the supposed gory crimes of their reclusive neighbor, or attempting to lure him out of his haunt. They take an unhealthy delight in their neighbor, and turn a town mystery, the tale of an unfortunate family, into a gory thriller. They take parlor gossip, venomous speculation, and wed them to their own ignorant imagination for sheer pleasure. But in the end, this dark character reveals a compassionate human heart. He is a firm friend to the two children, and proves himself of more worth than many Maycombians who don't shun the light of day. Harper Lee urges us all through the book to look beyond stereotypes when summing up other people. How often do we encounter an Atticus, only to pass him off as a Don Quixote, fighting for outdated and impractical morals? How many Aunt Alexandrias have we missed, when we saw only an old spinster whose principles are more rigid than her iron corset? Harper exhorts us to not stop at or begin with those prejudiced patterns that are in our minds. But, as Atticus counsels Scout, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside his skin and walk around in it. In the last scene of Mockingbird, the rippling and chasing currents of the story still into a glassy pool, and reflect clearly the message of the tale. Scout stands on Boo Radley's porch in the quiet of the night, looking down Main Street, Maycomb. And for a moment, the world shifts. She is not Scout Finch gazing into the mysterious, ghosted darkness of Boo Radley's place, but she is Boo Radley, staring out of his dark solitude at Maycomb outside, the Maycomb that pressed him into solitude, whose venomous tongues prompt him to keep inside his shell, and whose minds would jump to fearful conclusions should he ever come out. Everyone understands who reads the book that Tom Robinson is unjustly misunderstood and judged, but Harper does not stop or even begin with condemning the whites' cruelty towards blacks. She takes the condemnation right into the living room of every Maycomb inhabitant, from great to small, and right into the living room of every American. Harper Lee concludes her story soon after Scout speaks of her experience on the porch. Atticus was right. One time he said you never really knew a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. Scout declares her lessons learned. People are to be treated with respect and charity, but that starts with thinking about them in a charitable way. You must see others as people. You must dig beyond their manners, their civilized polish or barbarian ways, their aged frame, their harsh speech, and see their humanity. And when you begin to see them as human, you will understand how important it is to treat them with kindness. Armed with this knowledge, Scout declares herself ready for life. As I made my way home, I thought Jim and I would get grown, but there wasn't much left for us to learn, except possibly algebra. Harper's exhortation, brilliantly delivered through the voice of a child, stole into the nation's heart. It is difficult to quantify the effect of something on the human psyche, and especially so on the mind of a whole nation, but we can be sure, from the people's response to the book, that it affected the nation's heart and its history. It was a messenger of hope and encouragement to those who were standing for justice and equality. It showed the world that great deeds start in the privacy of one's own mind. How you look at others will determine how you act towards them. But it also reminded the world that the greatest vehicle of change is not large society-shifting acts. The change America needed would be in small, everyday kindness to others. To those who had gone with the flow, refusing to challenge injustice because it was too ingrained in their lives to be comfortably removed, To Kill a Mockingbird shook them out of their complacency. The shock of 2 children, when shown the hatred in the hearts of Maycomb citizens, reminds us afresh of the dark nature of our prejudicial judgments. We see ourselves in Scout, but also in the rest of Maycomb. To Kill a Mockingbird captured the heart of a nation, but it also laid it bare. Those who were doing well, it encouraged to do better. Those who were living in enmity and hatred, it exhorted to repent. The book embodied the very state of the nation.
In To Kill a Mockingbird, Lee has shown us to keep faith in and protect others based on who they truly are and not who we think they are. We all, as humans, should be about caring for other humans who aren't like us. We should not be shunning them because we don't understand them. You can't be the one to judge a person when you haven't been in their life journey and walking in their shoes. To Kill a Mockingbird was written to witness a time of outrage and chaos through an innocent child's eyes. Because of that, we are more receptive to the situation, and we can feel the emotions all of the characters are feeling. America did not receive the many books, speeches, or writings that outrightly condemned inequality. They didn't like being preached at, but when this author came to them with a compelling story to remind them of the inhumanity of such things, they relented. The innocence of Scout and Jem, shown in the deeds being done in Maycomb, showed America her misdeeds in a way nothing else could have. In the final chapter, Atticus tells Scout a story resembling that of the recent events, but instead, this time, the character's innocence is revealed. Scout tells Atticus, when they finally saw him, he hadn't done any of those things. Atticus, he was real nice. Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them. That is the response of Atticus and the plea of Harper Lee to her readers, a plea for sympathy and charity, a plea to put compassion before prejudice, empathy before condemnation, and it is a reminder of the only thing which will mend the rent in American society: humble, everyday goodwill and decency.